Hello guys, how are you? My name is Diaz, and in this video I'm gonna present you a really interesting topic about English language that I think you have to learn it about. Okay, it's time to learn. So as you know guys, the English language is a really interesting language and that totally depends of the sounds. So let's take into account the sounds in this case, okay? So for this reason, many people has created a correct way to pronounce the vowels or the consonants when we're speaking English. So in this case, let's take into account the vowels and the consonants that we pronounce when we're speaking, okay? So for this reason, as you know guys, we have many ways to pronounce the vowels or the consonants. So in this case, when we want to talk about the A sound, we have many ways to pronounce it. And we have to take into account this, okay? Let's take the example of the Spanish. In Spanish, we have the five main vowels when we're speaking Spanish. So we have the sounds A, E, I, O, and U. But happens something interesting in English because here we have two examples about the first vowel, A. In Spanish, this sounds would sound like A. But happens something really interesting in the first vowel because this A sound sounds like A, and in the second word sounds like A. So we have main and we have a strategy because and the first sound is affected by the last sound. So, a wise man has created something called phonology, taking into account all mentioned. So, in this video, we're going to check something about phonology, okay? Let's remember this. As you know, guys, phonology is the study of the vowels or the consonant sounds that is sometimes are affected by a consonant or a vowel as the same way. So taking into account this, we have created something called segmental and suprasegmental features of English, or in this case of the sounds. But in this case, let's talk about just suprasegmental features, okay? Okay, if you have an elevated English level of the English language, you know that in some cases, vowels or consonant sounds are not pronounced. So take into account this. Putting an example, we have the word right. As you know, in this case, the E sound doesn't are pronounced and just have the termination T. So in this case, we have that vowels are not pronounced. But you will ask yourself, why is the reason about the vowels are not pronounced in some cases? And we have a reason for this. So, is this something incorrect? The response is no. That's something natural that happens in between native speakers. So native speakers use much the omitting of vowels or consonant sounds when they're speaking. That's something that happen between native speakers. Is this something natural in the speaking in between them? So you will say, is this something useful or important for me? And the response is yes. This is something that you have to learn. And the reason for this is that is something natural that happens between native speakers. Your mouth doesn't want to work any harder than it has to, so it tries to blend all the sounds together. On the other hand, listeners needs to be able to hear the difference between different sounds, or they won't understand what you're saying. Our mouth have to find a balance when we speak, comfortable but not too sloppy. Okay, students don't necessarily have to produce all of these changes all the time, but they really need to understand them when they hear them, and whenever they listen to real English, the real English, they will learn they will hear them correctly. But in this case, guys, I'm gonna teach you something really interesting, something really useful and important that you have to learn if you wanna try this language. And with nothing more to say, guys, let's learn about this really interesting topics. First of all, we have a topic called contractions. In this case, we're talking about blending words. In this case, we have is plus not. And if we want to make a contraction, we have the word isn't. In this case, we have a tool called apostrophe. This apostrophe helps us to make a contraction when we want to make a word or two words shorter. In this case, our apostrophe it's a useful tool to make a contraction. In the other case, we have some examples. We have are not, or is not, or would not. The contraction of the first will be aren't, the second isn't, and the third wouldn't. So in this case, our apostrophe would be a really useful tool to make contractions. In the other hand, we have another really interesting topic that called linking words. In this case, we have to take into account that we could link a consonant and vowel, or we could link a consonant and another consonant. So for this case, let's talk about the consonant and vowel linking. So we have the phrase, I found out that. In this case, we have the linking between found and out. And that results in I found out that. And we have to take into account that this is important because like this, we have a faster way to pronounce the phrase or two sounds when we're speaking in English. Okay, let's check another example. So in this case, when we want to make a linking words, we have the phrase, this pronunciation is fun. So in this case, we have the linking between pronunciation and is. We have to take into account the N termination and the next vowel. So that results in this pronunciation and the next is found. This pronunciation is found. So in this case, we have to take into account again that we have a faster way that is faster than the first word. So, talking about the linking words again, we have the second way to make a linking word. So we have the consonant plus consonant. And in this case, let's put another example, okay? Here we have my pet tiger. In this case, we have the linking words between T and T sounds, and that results in my pet tiger. In this case, we have to add another T between those words, and we have to take into account the pronunciation, the moment of pronunciation. It is a faster kind of pronunciation of the words. In the other hand, we have another interesting kind of linking. So we have the termination E, A, and I. So we have the example say it well. In this case, we have the linking between say and it, and that results in say it. In this case, we have to add another Y sound between say and it, and the complement well. In this case, we have to take into account again and the moment of pronunciation. This is another kind of faster pronunciation, and that is faster than the first at the moment of pronunciation. So we have another interesting kind of linking. We have the termination O, U, and L. In this case, we have this example. We have to take into account the termination, and the next word begins with a vowel. So in this case, we have the example. Red is now in fashion. In this case, we have the linking between now and in, and that results in red is now in fashion. So in this case, we add a W, another W sounds between now and in. And like this, that's the same way we have to take into account the pronounced moment that is faster than the first question or sentence. Okay, let's talk about another interesting topic about suprasegmental features. In assimilation, we blend or link words similar to linking, but in this case, we have an easier way to pronounce the words. And in assimilation, we can find some interesting cases. So in this case, the second word makes the first changes. In the other hand, we have the first makes the second changes. And we have that the first and the second word blend to make a new word. So we have the example, have to. And taking into account that the phonemes of this word or this phrase, we have the sounds H of have, a have that represents with a Q, and to that represents with a FT, with an apostrophe. And like this way, we have an easier way to pronounce the words of the phrase that we have to say. In the other hand, we have the second case of assimilation, where the first word makes the second changes. So in this case, we have the example, bags. We have the assimilation in X, and that results in the B sounds, the A sounds that represent with a Q, and the KS without an apostrophe. In this case, we link the words KS to make an easier way to pronounce the word bags. So, and finally, we have the third case of assimilation where the first and second words blend to make a new word. So in this case, we have the example. The sounds S, Z, T, D, T, and Z. But in this case, we have to take into account the beginning of the next word, that in this case is a Y sound. So we have the example, Monsieur. And in this case, we have the blend of Z sound and Y. We have the sound M, we have the E sound, blending by a sound, and the termination of U, that with U and W. And like this, we have an easier way to pronounce the word or the phrase that we have to say. And finally, we have another interesting topic called deletion, that is similar to contractions or blends, but in this case, we're just omitting the sounds of the vowels, of the consonants, whatever. So we have the example is not. In this case, making a contraction is isn't. But in this case, we have to take into account we omit the sound O, and that's result in a new kind of word. So putting another example, we have the words would plus not, making a contraction that results in wouldn't. But in this case, we have to take into account the deletion. We omit the sound O. So, and that's all for this video, guys. I hope you like it, and see you in another interesting video. Thank you.